The story begins with Gamon Yoon, a 15-year-old student, sitting in his chaotic classroom and attempting to review his exam paper. However, we quickly discover that Gamon Yoon struggles with studying despite his determination to excel. His frustration with his lack of progress leads him to throw his red marker away, inadvertently hitting the table and causing it to bounce off into the background. As the scene shifts, Gamon's internal monologue continues. Next, we observe Gamon Yoon returning home with a martial arts book in hand and a hopeful grin on his face. He is eager to read the newly released book that evening. His attention then shifts to two women conversing inside the house. Gamon's mother introduces him to his new tutor, Haekyong Lee, a 23-year-old woman. Gamon Yoon reacts with surprise and discomfort, concealing the book behind his back and avoiding eye contact as he walks away with a simple greeting. Gamon Yoon's mother expresses concern about his behavior and urges Ms. Lee to establish a good relationship with her son, to which Ms. Lee responds with a nervous laugh. Time progresses, and it is now 6 p.m. Gamon Yoon sits at his study table with Ms. Lee, who continues teaching him math. She praises Gamon Yoon for his quick comprehension and believes that with consistent effort, his grades will improve. To motivate him, she asks him to repeat after her with enthusiastic energy. Although Gamon Yoon matches her mood with less enthusiasm, but he still participates. 2 years later, we find Gamon Yoon in his high school uniform, reviewing his answers. Despite the passage of time, his grades remain unchanged. Though Ms. Lee's teaching is effective, Gamon Yoon lacks a natural aptitude for studying. Suddenly, an orange-haired student named Hyunwoo Lee rushes in, aggressively dragging another student with him and slamming their head onto Gamon Yoon's table. Gamon Yoon is thrown off balance as the rest of the class cheers for Hyunwoo Lee. Hyunwoo Lee continues the assault on the other students, punching them repeatedly while the class cheers him on. Gamon Yoon regains his footing, collects his notebook, and brushes off the dust. He remains indifferent to the ongoing brawl and distances himself from the chaotic crowd. Gamon Yoon attends Yusung Technical High School, known for its notorious reputation as a school for delinquents. It is a dangerous place where survival of the fittest prevails. Despite the challenges, Gamon Yoon sees potential opportunities for those who have not given up on their studies. He embraces the motto, "I create opportunities even in the most challenging situations." Gamon Yoon voluntarily enrolled in the school to pursue his dream of attending a 4-year college. He believes that excelling in this environment will give him a competitive edge due to his peers' lack of interest in academics. Assuming that he can withstand 3 years in this setting, that is, but Gamon still has hope that it will work out. As Gamon Yoon walks through the school corridors, lost in thought, he locks eyes with a delinquent holding a cigarette. The encounter prompts the delinquent to threaten Gamon Yoon, who reacts by crouching under a window to avoid detection. Returning to the classroom, Gamon Yoon sits at his desk, attempting to study amid the usual chaos of students fighting, chatting, sleeping, and playing video games. The teacher comes in and announces the replacement of the previous class teacher, but the announcement does not surprise the class. It isn't even acknowledged by anyone in the class other than Gamon Yoon himself. However, the reason for Gamon Yoon paying mind to such an announcement was because it involved someone he had known for a period of time. Gamon Yoon is taken aback to see Ms. Haekyong Lee, his former tutor, as the new homeroom teacher. Seeing Ms. Lee reminds Gamon Yoon of their conversations about their dreams. Ms. Lee had aspired to pass the teacher certification exam and help guide students in the right direction. She thought that with correct guidance, any student would be able to succeed and become a better person. The flashback ends, and we return to the present. Ms. Lee remains largely ignored by the class, with only Gamon paying attention to her presence. Gamon Yoon assumes that Ms. Lee must have failed her exam since she joined a private school like Yusung Technical High School. The teacher who introduced Ms. Lee to the class departs, leaving her feeling uneasy and uncertain about handling the class in its current state. She tries to assert control by slamming her hands on the table to gain attention, only to be suddenly met with a flying bottle that struck her hand, causing her to scream in pain. Hyunwoo Lee is responsible for throwing the bottle and dismisses the incident with a casual wave. He demands Ms. Lee conclude the morning meeting and starts making fun of her. As Ms. Lee endures further mockery, A student standing behind Hyunwoo Lee notices it was his bottle that was used and confronts Hyunwoo Lee, resulting in a heated argument. The conflict escalates as Hyunwoo Lee throws the student out of the classroom window, resulting in the breaking of glass and the shattered fragments to scatter all over the place. Ms. Lee watches in horror as the glass shatters and the student lands in the schoolyard. Hyunwoo Lee follows, climbing down to continue the fight as a crowd gathers, cheering for Hyunwoo Lee and some even betting on the outcome. As Hyunwoo Lee is about to strike his opponent, a burly, bald man in a tracksuit rushes towards them, scaring the students away. The man, known as Tom Kench, berates Ms. Lee for not intervening and criticizes her lack of responsibility. He reveals that Ms. Lee is only a contract teacher attempting to mock her in a condescending way and leaves the scene, instructing her to clean up the broken glass. While cleaning up the scene, Ms. Lee cuts her finger on a shard of glass, causing her to bleed. She sighs, tears welling up in her eyes. Just then, a hand offers her a band-aid, and Ms. Lee turns to thank the person, surprised to find Gamon Yoon offering the help. Sometime later, Ms. Lee and Gamon Yoon have moved to another location. Ms. Lee expresses regret over leaving tutoring to focus on her studies. Gamon inquires whether she plans to stay at the school and warns her about the challenges ahead. He explains that the recent incident was only the beginning and that similar behavior led the previous homeroom teacher to quit. Despite the circumstances, Ms. Lee remains hopeful that she can positively influence the students and guide them toward better choices. As she continues her thoughts, Gamon Yoon interrupts her with a heavy expression, warning her of Hyunwoo Lee and his gang approaching. Ms. Lee slips away without informing Gamon Yoon to confront Hyunwoo Lee about smoking on school grounds. Ms. Lee demands they extinguish their cigarettes, which surprises Gamon Yoon watching from a distance. Hyunwoo Lee dismisses her request, explaining that the school does not penalize them for smoking and even provides them with receptacles for cigarette butts. Unfazed, Ms. Lee steps closer to Hyunwoo Lee, grabbing his hand to express her genuine desire to improve their health. Gamon Yoon observes, surprised to see Hyunwoo Lee drop his cigarette in response. Hyunwoo Lee sarcastically asks if she genuinely intends to help him quit smoking, and Ms. Lee enthusiastically responds. Hyunwoo Lee suddenly extends his hand toward Ms. Lee's face, and a loud smack shocks Gamon. Ms. Lee stumbles backward, falling to the ground as Hyunwoo Lee and his gang mock her. Hyunwoo Lee challenges Ms. Lee's commitment, calling her just a contract teacher. Despite being struck, Ms. Lee persists in trying to teach them, only to face more insults and threats from Hyunwoo Lee and his group. Gamon Yoon, recalling his recent conversation with Ms. Lee and memories of their past interactions, steps forward to shield her with his school blazer. The group makes fun of Gamon Yoon, but he remains focused on Ms. Lee and asks her to hold onto his jacket. One of the gang members charges at Gamon Yoon, aiming to kick him, but Gamon Yoon evades and tackles him to the ground. Hyunwoo Lee and the gang are amused by their friend's failed attempt and mock him for being defeated. The same member charges at Gamon Yoon again, but this time, Gamon Yoon takes a stance inspired by the famous one-inch punch. With a swift and precise strike, Gamon Yoon knocks out the attacking student. Hyunwoo Lee and the others are stunned by Gamon's unexpected martial arts skill. Hyunwoo Lee, angered by the situation, rushes at Gamon Yoon with the intent to beat him. This moment reveals the unusual interest Gamon Yoon's mother referred to when she introduced him to Ms. Lee. As a child, Gamon Yoon had been fascinated by Bruce Lee and had trained extensively in martial arts, learning from online videos and practical experiences. Back in the present, Gamon Yoon suddenly performs a backflip, evading Hyunwoo Lee's attack and causing his glasses to fly off in the process. The motion also strikes Hyunwoo Lee's chin, sending him backward. The gang is shocked to see Hyunwoo Lee was unconscious on the ground, with foam emerging from his mouth. The bullies hurriedly gather Hyunwoo Lee and flee the scene. Gamon Yoon sighs and brushes his hair aside as he watches them retreat. Ms. Lee, speechless from witnessing the fight, is startled when Gamon Yoon approaches her. He extends his hand to offer support, and she looks up in surprise. Gamon Yoon recalls Ms. Lee's earlier regret about leaving tutoring and asks her to reconsider staying at the school to help him study. He requests that she reconsider her decision to quit tutoring. The scene shifts to one of Hyunwoo Lee's associates informing a muscular individual in the gym about Gamon Yoon's recent victory over Hyunwoo Lee. Additional scenes show various gang members discussing Gamon Yoon, with some planning to confront him. In the final scene, Ms. Lee reaches out and firmly grasps Gamon Yoon's hand. This is the story of Gamon Yoon, a student who continues to struggle with academics while facing fierce battles. His journey toward college admission is marked by perseverance, even if it comes at a cost. In the early morning, we observe Gamon engaged in physical exercise at the children's playground. A security guard stands nearby, commending Gamon for his exemplary form and robust health. Lost in contemplation, the guard continues to admire Gamon, referring to him as a work of art. However, upon realizing that Gamon has exceeded his predetermined time, the guard promptly alerts him, prompting Gamon to react anxiously and stumble. Expressing gratitude to the guard for the timely notification, Gamon hastily departs, proceeding cautiously as he unlocks the door to his residence. He retrieves and reinstalls a previously removed battery, essential for his act of sneaking out earlier. Just as the battery is reinstalled, an alarm sounds, prompting Gamon to swiftly retreat to his bedroom, concealing himself beneath a blanket to evade detection by his mother. As his mother approaches to awaken him for school, Gamon calmly emerges from beneath the blanket, feigning the appearance of having just awakened from slumber. Resolving to dedicate himself to diligent study, he prepares for the school day. Shifting focus, we are introduced to Ms. Lee, who has also recently risen from a restless sleep. Still preoccupied by events from the previous day, which resulted in her obtaining only a scant 3 hours of rest, Ms. Lee reflects on Gamon's words, evoking a sense of apprehension. Despite her unease, she endeavors to steel herself for another day at school. Arriving at the high school, Ms. Lee enters with trepidation, inwardly reassuring herself that all will be well. Meanwhile, Gamon, noticing Ms. Lee's arrival but refraining from approaching her, proceeds to his classroom, contemplating his aspirations of attending a 4-year college. Determined to seek like-minded peers, he scans the classroom, ultimately fixing his attention on Seon Kim, a fellow student from the mechanics major and at the age of 17 immersed in study. Gamon, who had been trying to have a chat with Seon Kim for the past few days, is rejected again as Seon Kim promptly gets up to leave the class, not wanting to deal with Gamon any longer. But undeterred, Gamon resolves to enlist Seon Kim's support in pursuing their shared goal of college admission. Transitioning to Seon Kim, we find him pondering over the person who had been asking him to tutor him for days, which he finds bothersome. His musings are interrupted by the sudden appearance of Jae-Hwang Chu, a senior student from welding major and at the age of 18, who grabs his shoulder without any prior notice, making Seon Kim react aggressively by whacking his hand away, thinking it might be Gamon again who came to bother him. This act from Seon Kim ruins Jae-Hwang Chu's mood as his changed aggressive demeanor incites fear in Seon Kim. Forced to accompany Jae-Hwang Chu outside, Seon Kim's apprehension mounts. In a different setting, we find ourselves in the staff room, where a teacher, addressing Ms. Lee sternly, admonishes her for her conduct during a recent meeting and attributes responsibility for previous incident regarding the broken glass windows and the fight to her. With a stern warning to improve her performance, Ms. Lee is reminded of the impending school inspector's visit and instructed to ensure a trouble-free inspection. Departing the staff room, Ms. Lee reflects on her frustration with the school's inaction regarding student misconduct. She had informed the school about the students smoking openly, but no action was taken regardless. Her ruminations are interrupted by the sound of violence nearby, drawing her attention to Jae-Hwang Chu assaulting Seon Kim, accompanied by 3 other students being disciplined. Jae-Hwang Chu strikes Seon Kim on the side of his neck with a kick, which results in Seon Kim falling over with tears welling up in his eyes as he struggles, gasping for air. Not satisfied with the punishment, Jae-Hwang Chu decides he would have to hit Seon Chu with an iron pipe instead if he wanted him to learn. Witnessing the brutality, Ms. Lee is overcome with horror and attempts to intervene, only to be paralyzed by fear and memories of a prior encounter with Hyunwoo Lee. Her legs tremble as she plops over on her knees. Her heart starts thumping louder and louder as she struggles with her emotions. Just then, Gamon emerges to aid her, grabbing her by her wrist and pulling her over from the ground and up on her feet. He looks over at the situation as Ms. Lee looks somewhat relieved to see Gamon arrive and clenches his fists with a serious look on his face. Gamon's resolute demeanor hints at his determination to prevent Seon Kim's potential transfer, complicating his plans. We see Jae-hwang Chu looking down at Seon nonchalantly, who's on the ground, crouched over with hands on top of his head, begging for him to stop and apologizing with tears running down his cheeks. Gamon Yoon, who had just arrived outside, decides to go ahead and confront Jae-hwang Chu when Ms. Lee, startled by this sudden action of his, stops him to ask what he was going to do. Here we learn the exact goal of Gamon Yoon, who had been planning to make Seon Kim join his study group. We end up with another flashback where we see a 3 years younger Gamon Yoon, who had been busy studying at the desk in his room at the time, overhear a simple phrase that came up during the conversation between her mother and her friend regarding a study group. The other lady can be seen bragging about the improvement in her son's grade, due to him being a part of a study group, and brings up a suggestion of letting Gamon Yoon join one as well. Gamon Yoon's mother, knowing about her son's situation, is only able to provide an awkward smile as she discards the suggestion indirectly by making an excuse and decides to rather hire a private tutor for him instead. Still in the flashback, we see Gamon Yoon attending a middle school. Inside the classroom, Gamon Yoon gets rejected by a nerdy-looking guy with glasses, as they didn't want a guy who came second last in the midterms joining their study group. According to them, there was nothing they could possibly learn from Gamon with his grades being so low. Dejected from the rejection, Gamon Yoon walks away with drooped shoulders as the group of kids keep on making fun of him behind his back. We then learn that even later on, he kept asking other classmates of his to let him join their study groups, but no one took him in due to his poor grades. They all gave him various differing reasons to not let him in, but all besides one person. He had thought that he would finally get to join a study group after not getting rejected outright for once, and is elated when he suddenly gets a notification for a new message on his phone, only to see him getting rejected again through text. Taking out his frustration by screaming out his lungs, he heads on home to continue to work hard on improving his grades. It is at late night and Gamon Yoon is busy studying as usual when the door to his room opens and her mother enters to check in on her son and to also discuss about the tutor she had previously been talking about. She notices that Gamon Yoon had been crying and rushes in to console him. She asks if anything had happened at school, but Gamon Yoon denies the idea, attributing it to his frustration rather than any specific event. For Gamon Yoon, who had been prevented from joining a study group for so long, he naturally started wanting to do exactly that even more. That is how it became somewhat of a dream of Gamon to join a study group someday. Now, back at the present, Gamon Yoon continues on towards Jae-hwang Chu, his mind busy with his own thoughts and set on helping Seon Kim so that he could join his study group later. All of a sudden, Ms. Lee reaches out with her hand and catches Gamon Yoon by his wrists, halting his advance and confusing him by this act of hers. She knew that Gamon Yoon was going to resort to violence, but she couldn't stand it, as according to her, even though a place where fights were the norm, this was still strictly a school only meant for studying. As their teacher, she simply couldn't allow her students to hurt each other. Seeing Ms. Lee act like this, Gamon Yoon shows a mischievous grin as he asks, seemingly affirming if it was alright as long as he didn't use his fists. Right at the same time, Jae-hwang Chu also decides to rush ahead with a punch ready to smack Seon Kim on his head as he grabs hold of him by his collar. Abruptly, big amount of smoke rushes in, filling the room to the brim, causing the movements of Jae-hwang Chu to come to an end as he puts a hand to his nose, covering it to prevent coughing. Surprised by the unexpected situation, he turns around, trying to find the culprit, and notices an empty fire extinguisher holder, which seems to give him an understanding on as to how the situation evolved into something like this. Despite being angry by the current situation but being helpless about it, all Jae-hwang Chu could do was take out his anger on his juniors who he had been punishing before, who could not stand the smoke and had started coughing endlessly. Jae-hwang Chu screams at the air, but the target for his threats being the cause of the smoke filling the room when Gamon decides to hastily fling the fire extinguisher to the ground and rush in towards Jae-hwang Chu and Seon Kim to grab Seon Kim and get him out of there. Gamon Yoon brushes past Jae-hwang Chu very roughly, causing him to fall back as he is successful in grabbing Seon Kim and emerges out from the smoke with a welding helmet covering his head. The fallen Jae-hwang Chu hastily turns around to check on the identity of the man who had done all this, but realizes that the person had been long gone through the back door. Ms. Lee, who had just witnessed this whole event, is dumbstruck as she just stands there without moving, contemplating on the method Gamon Yoon had used to help his classmate. She is glad that Gamon Yoon didn't get into a fight, but finds the overall method a bit too extra than necessary. The scene changes and we see Seon Kim's shocked exclaims after learning that the person who had saved him was Gamon Yoon. Gamon Yoon, thinking that he would be grateful for his help, asks him to join his study group in turn, but is cut off by an angry Seon Kim asking him the reason for messing with Jae-hwang Chu, even when he knew who he was. Seon is assuming that he does. But Gamon Yoon's genuine lack of knowledge about the person in question causes Seon Kim to be taken aback. We then learn through Seon Kim's mouth that they are the infamous White Lead 4 of Yusung Technical High, that they are the kids of the leaders of the famously devious White Lead gang of Incheon and had grown up under the gangsters since they were young. Seon Kim is about to continue with his explanation when he gets suddenly cut off by Gamon Yoon, who, still with an impassive face, shows no interest in them whatsoever as they had nothing to do with studies. Taken aback again by Gamon Yoon's thought process, Seon Kim snaps with anger and yells at Gamon, who had been trying to convince him to join his study group, which got promptly ignored by Seon Kim at the time, causing him to fall back in surprise. The cause of Seon Kim's anger is because he thinks that Gamon Yoon interfering would only drag him deeper into trouble. As the guy, Jae-hwang Chu was someone who would leave anyone alone after he defeats them once, and as long as he gets a hold of you, it was better for weak kids like Seon Kim to just get things over with and be done. But since he didn't get to end it, he would have to go through this again. Seon Kim continues telling off Gamon Yoon, but turns around and starts walking away as Gamon Yoon tries to get up and go after him. He stops in his tracks for a moment to turn around and calls out the pretense of Gamon Yoon for not knowing about them because there was no need for him to cover his face with a mask if he didn't. But he had done so nonetheless because Gamon Yoon also wanted to avoid trouble with them. The statement made by Seon Kim hits the bullseye, catching Gamon Yoon off guard as he dramatically acts MO and flops down on his knees. Just then, a voice calls out to Seon Kim suddenly, startling both him and Gamon Yoon, who in turn hastily puts back his mask on to cover his face. Jae-hwang Chu, who had arrived in front of them, mocks them for their stupidity as they didn't take into account the trail the foam from the fire extinguisher left behind, making it easy for Jae-hwang Chu to catch up. More so interested in the friend who had helped Seon Kim escape, Jae-hwang Chu asks about his friend's identity. Seon Kim answers he doesn't know the guy, and Gamon Yoon, catching his intent of protecting him behind that sentence, is moved and at the same time also recalls what Seon Kim had told him earlier about this being a matter of survival, which was even more important than studying to him. Angered by the act of Seon Kim at the last second, Jae-hwang Chu grabs him by his collar as he threatens to beat him until he wets himself when an abrupt kick comes flying in, landing directly on his face. This results in Jae-hwang Chu crashing on the ground, and we see Gamon Yoon standing behind Seon Kim with one leg in the air as if taking a kicking pose. But it doesn't take long for Jae-hwang Chu to get back up on his feet as he curses at and questions about the person who kicked him. Not expecting something like this would happen, a surprised Seon Kim turns around to find it was Gamon Yoon who had just kicked Jae-hwang Chu right on his face. He hadn't expected Gamon Yoon to be that good at fighting and is also somewhat depressed that his lies to protect Gamon Yoon had all but gone to waste. This is when Gamon Yoon calls out to Seon Kim again, telling him that he would make it so that Seon would only have to focus on his studies without worrying about his survival at all, and offering him a place in his study group. Questioning Gamon's nonchalant behavior despite currently being in a fight and his face revealed, Seon Kim is not sure what to think about. Gamon Yoon continues on with his words towards Seon Kim when Jae-hwang Chu arrives in front of him with a fist, ready to hit him. Despite the close distance between Gamon and Jae-hwang's fist, Gamon seems to not even care about the incoming attack as he just casually dodges the punch by moving his upper body back by a bit, all the while in the midst of talking to Seon Kim about his plan to pass the entrance exams. Both Seon Kim and Jae-hwang Chu are surprised by the fact that Gamon Yoon dodged the punch just like that, but they are surprised even more so by the fact that he did it without even looking at the opponent. Jae-hwang just as suddenly readies another punch as Gamon is busy explaining his plans to Seon Kim. This freaks out Seon Kim as he warns Gamon about the attack hastily. But Gamon Yoon, without even registering the warning and focusing only on having a chat, dodges again by ducking the swinging fist with ease. Jae-hwang Chu, after the second punch, realizes that Gamon was not just randomly dodging his blows and that even when he was talking about the exams, he was predicting his moves. Finding the situation and the person amusing, Jae-hwang grins and starts hopping and throwing out jabs in the air, seemingly to intimidate his opponent while also talking about how their school was all about one's fist and that such a place would never change because of the likes of Gamon Yoon. He charges at Gamon Yoon again with a fist as Seon Kim closes his eyes in horror, not wanting to witness the eventual defeat of Gamon. The words of Jae-hwang had also affected Seon, as he had also genuinely started believing that such a place wouldn't change just because a single person makes a stand. The fist nears the helmet Gamon is wearing, and in the next scene, we see the helmet shooting up towards the sky. It then falls back down as the rest of the scene comes into view and Gamon is seen standing with Jae-hwang's hand in his grasp along with a not-so-amused expression on his face. Jae-hwang, caught up in Gamon's hand, is baffled after realizing how amazing his strength really was. Gamon Yoon still expresses his unwillingness to fight, but Jae-hwang ignores it outright and throws out another punch, wanting to make him let go of his hand. The fist zooms in when it abruptly comes to a halt as Gamon, with a speed hard to catch with normal eyes, using casual taps 3 times in a row to kill the momentum of the fist, succeeds in stopping the punch without much effort. Without giving any time to Jae-hwang to recover, he twists the other hand he already had in his grip as he smacks Jae-hwang's open face with a fast jab, causing him to stumble and fall back onto the ground. Jae-hwang Chu is completely frozen by the fact that he couldn't even hit him once, as Gamon Yoon shows regret at unknowingly fighting back but recovers fast and quickly goes back to try and coax Seon into joining his study group. Seon, hardly believing the fact that Jae-hwang was so easily taken down by Gamon Yoon, looks ahead with a blank stare but comes back to his mind after getting called out by Gamon again. He starts believing that maybe things could really work, and after looking back on the life he had lived so far, decides to focus on solely what he wanted and agrees to join Gamon's study group with a bright smile on his face. Elated by the fact that he had won Seon over, Gamon turns around to do a small celebratory hurrah when the bells suddenly go off, announcing the start of the classes. They decide to rush back to their class, leaving Jae-hwang Chu behind by himself. Contemplating over the son of the operation head of the White Lead Gang, Jae-hwang Chu's loss, he clenches his jaws in anger as he tries denying the obvious that had happened. He seems to be getting progressively angrier when suddenly a voice comes out from behind him telling him that he had indeed in fact lost, leaving Jae-hwang Chu stunned. He turns around while cursing to find the speaker, only to get struck with surprise after learning that it was Pai Hanwol, the son of the boss of the White Lead Gang. Jae-hwang asks him if he had seen everything, to which Hanwol replies that he was impressed to see Jae-hwang, with 4 years of kickboxing experience, get beaten down so one-sidedly. Hanwol then orders Jae-hwang to get up, which he easily complies to, but is about to ask the reason behind it when suddenly, Hanwol throws a punch out, hitting straight at the face of Jae-hwang, causing him to crash back with a loud grunt. Hanwol then walks up to the fallen Jae-hwang, who has blood streaming down his nose, and asks him on who he thought was stronger. Hanwol pieces together the things and comes to the conclusion that the guy who defeated Hyun Lee should have also been him, and shows his curiosity to see how long he would be able to hold out with that freshman spirit of his.